Hello, everyone. We want to thank each of you for joining today's webinar, Security in the Age of Connected Things. Leading our webinar today is PointClear Solutions Vice President of Technical Services, Michael Atkins. A little bit about Michael. Michael joined PointClear Solutions in 2017, and he's responsible for overseeing all aspects of the company's technical services function, including management of our team of architects and engineers. Before joining PointClear, Michael spent several years with Change Healthcare, where he served as Director of Applications Development in the Engagement Solutions Division. Prior to this, Michael was a Director of Healthcare Clinical Solutions Development with Walgreens. Michael holds a degree in Computer Science and Accounting from Mississippi State University, and he is based out of PointClear's Nashville office. With that, I will turn it over to Michael. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Derek. I appreciate that. And thanks everybody for taking time out this morning to talk about what is certainly a very important topic and what I hope will be a very interesting topic. And really this I just want to level set that, whether you are someone who has an idea for a new connected device, or you're someone who has a device already in the marketplace and you're curious whether you could or should be doing more as it relates to security, or if you're just consulting with these companies, or if you're just a consumer and you have some smart devices at home and you're wondering if you're taking the security of the devices that you own seriously enough. I hope that there was something in this for all of those audiences. So with that, we'll jump right in. So I like to start these by defining some terms. So we'll start with a definition of just what is the Internet of Things as we're going to use it in this conversation. Then we're going to talk about the challenges, as it relates to the devices themselves, and then challenges as it relates to the data that the devices generate and then need to send somewhere else, the connected aspect, if you will. And then some organizational challenges, things that should be embedded in your process and your team structure to really ensure that security stays central in your focus. And then we'll have time, obviously, for Q&A at the end. So, if we're going to talk about securing something, then we need to know what that something is. So what is this Internet of Things that we're talking about? And so, a dictionary definition might look like this. So interconnection via the Internet of computing devices embedded in everyday objects, enabling them to send and receive data. So there's really three components of that definition that stick out, and I want to drill down on because they may help differentiate an IoT device from something that might be a very helpful assistive device, but wouldn't fall into this definition necessarily. So via the Internet, IoT devices use the same infrastructure as the rest of the Internet. Just by saying that, we can clearly see that we're inheriting a set of risks that have existed as long as the web has. So a lot of the risk that comes along with moving devices into the IoT marketplace are identical. I would certainly recommend strongly against creating new custom protocols. Don't try to redo the Internet. You will have created a whole new class of problems for yourself. Definitely stick to the HTTPS and MQTT protocols that are readily available to you today. Everyday objects is another section of that definition, and one that's very important. And it's interesting because what differentiates an IoT device from just a PC is that people already have relationships with the ordinary versions of these things. People interact with light bulbs and refrigerators and and toasters and other things that are becoming more and more connected and automated. They already have traditional versions of these things, and they've already compartmentalized them mentally. They don't associate these devices with risk. They don't think of them in the same way they think of their desktop PC. And so part of the challenge for us in the IoT space is changing that relationship between people and the items that they're already familiar with and have been using for years. Many people are accustomed at this point to taking basic precautionary measures with their computers. They'll install antivirus and change passwords and use good passwords and that kind of thing. But even sophisticated users don't yet relate to IoT devices in that same way. And then send and receive data is certainly the part of the Internet of Things definition that is vital. You can build very valuable and even automative assistive technology devices that don't send and receive data. And if that's your approach, if you're going to build fully disconnected smart devices, you can ignore some of this presentation that talk about securing the data. But as you'll see, you will likely still need to have a strategy around keeping the devices themselves secure and up to date. If you're not using the internet to update your devices, then certainly you need an alternative strategy for that. I do like to have some levity here. This can become a heavy topic, and so I like to, you may hear me chuckle about smart toasters and things like that, but I want to stress that the companies we work with and really IoT vendors in general are looking to solve and are solving very real problems. They're overcoming, human limitations. In some cases, they're making life easier and in some cases even sustaining life with connected medical devices. So this is very serious, but at the same time, if you do hear me chuckle about the smart toaster, know that I've got all of this problem space in mind. So now that we've defined it, why should we focus on security as companies operating in the IoT space? Last November, the Australian and New Zealand CTO of Cisco, Kevin Block, was asked why 75% of IoT projects fail. And he cited several factors, and I want to cover three. Two aren't related to security, but are still things that feed into this conversation. In some respects, the honeymoon period, so the segmentation and point solution fatigue, in some respects, the honeymoon period is ending with consumers. Some devices still get this wow response, but consumers are just becoming more accustomed to being surrounded by smart devices. They accept that there are sensors in pretty much everything they interact with, and so it's gone from kind of this wow, I can't believe this is doing this, to why don't these things work together more fluidly? So you can kind of see that shift happening, and certainly Cisco sees that shift happening. He also cited inexperience and then security. And he said, if you don't secure it, don't connect it. In many ways, the IoT landscape is shaped by the weakest links in this connected chain, right? The more devices we connect to one another, the more devices we connect to data analysis platforms, then really we can only say that ecosystem is as secure as the weakest one of those things. So security problems don't just impact a single manufacturer anymore. They create an environment of distrust and probably well-earned distrust among the public. And so the more entrenched, larger vendors are really beginning to not really pull any punches when it comes to, we expect new entrants into this marketplace to prioritize security. Few people know that the massive Target credit card breach of a few years ago began with a compromised set of credentials given to an HVAC contractor. Target certainly has a very valid and need to know and monitor energy usage at their stores. So they had, they were collecting this data and enabled, external access to their thermostats to help, tell that story. We're being responsible with our energy usage. The problem was that that same account also had access somehow, and there's lots of analysis that's been done, somehow gave them access to the point of sale network, such that card skimming software was then installed, and we all know that millions and millions of people were impacted, having their identity stolen or potentially stolen during that breach. Another type of attack in 2016. A botnet, so an entire, hundreds or thousands of devices from cameras to baby monitors in people's houses were infected by a malware called Mirai, and they launched a distributed denial of service attack against Dyn. And Dyn is a company that provides DNS services to individuals and companies, to route traffic around the internet. And so, they were brought to a complete standstill for a considerable amount of time as these devices, unbeknownst to their owners, launched this massive coordinated attack. So as the number of sensors and connected devices continues to grow, as it will, the likelihood of future large-scale attacks like this increases. It's important to say that no two devices are the same. So there's certainly different levels of risk, and the amount of focus you place on security is going to vary based on the function of your device. Is it a convenience device that's nice to have, or is it life-sustaining? Is it a self-driving car that people rely on for their personal safety? A medical device that can impact somebody's health directly? As well as the sensitivity of the data you collect. You may have a convenience, a device that falls more on the convenience end of the spectrum, but you may be collecting some very sensitive data along the way. So both of those together give you a sense of where you might fall in kind of the red, yellow, green paradigm of security. There are industry organizations, we'll talk about a couple, that are working to create classification systems like for device manufacturers to give them guidance on where to really focus their security investment and time. And that said, even the lowest end, the lowest risk device still needs a security strategy. They will likely end up in homes and on networks connected with devices that are higher up the risk chain. And you do not want to be the front door. You don't want to be the HVAC thermostat that becomes the front door to a really massive attack. So, regardless of where you fall on this risk spectrum, a security strategy is essential. So we're going to step into, a more focused conversation around securing the devices themselves. But I wanted to take a second. Eric Schmidt, as you know, Google, he's predicting that kind of we will become so accustomed to being constantly surrounded by sensors and devices that are collecting and displaying and interacting with us that we will forget where the internet stops and starts. We will essentially just assume that everything we're doing is connected in some way to what everyone else is doing and what we did yesterday. So it's essential then, right, to be a responsible citizen in that new world. If that's true, you have to consider yourself not only as a manufacturer or a consultant here, but as a consumer. If it's true that you are going to become accustomed to that kind of life, don't you expect the people providing the solutions here to prioritize your security and privacy as well? So your light bulb is now a computer. That's easy to say, but like I said before, people are going to take some time to really begin to internalize that the things around them are, while they're making aspects of life easier and hassle-free and really beginning to make decisions, that suit the user without the user even asking them to. It's going to take time for people to compartmentalize these things in the same realm as they do their desktop PCs today. The devices don't look like computers. I screw in a smart light bulb and there's nothing that really tells me, hey, there's a processor and an operating system here that's connecting to your Wi-Fi network. You might want to think about that. They look like things people know and use every day. There's no visible indicator on many devices that anything smart is happening. There's no flashing LEDs. There's no indicator that would take this out of the realm of it's just a light bulb. This makes attacks against these devices hard to detect and even harder to mitigate. Manufacturers must work to ensure that they're not an overly attractive target for hackers. Some of this is going to happen because you need to secure the channels that enable that attack. Don't run unnecessary services or expose unused ports in your operating system. That Mirai malware we mentioned in the botnet example was a Linux malware. It distributed itself over Linux operating system using exposed ports. If you don't need to print from the device that you're selling, then make sure that network printing service is disabled and not exposed. It sounds simple, but unless you know intimately the operating system that's supporting your device, it's easy just to go with the defaults and never even think about it. Make sure your administrative interfaces are secured. If you have multiple devices, multiple product lines, use different administrative passwords on each one so that a successful attack against one of your devices doesn't just become a much more widespread attack by simple brute force of the admin password from the first device. Is your device communicating over Wi-Fi? Most will. Are you authenticating inbound communication, or are you just trusting whatever happens because it's clearly on the same local network? In most cases, you probably shouldn't just trust any traffic just because it comes from one of the local IPs, the non-routable IP addresses that are used. You still will want to authenticate that communication is coming from a trusted source of some kind, either yours or participating in a larger platform ecosystem, trusting that instead. And you might as well plan for it, because you will absolutely need to update your devices over time. Sometimes this will be because you want to add functionality, you want to make enhancements, you want to change the way you're collecting data, that kind of thing. But often it'll be because you've discovered, or someone has discovered, vulnerabilities in the device itself or in the systems that support the device. Every update you issue will have a unique risk profile. So the question is, do you know, for your next update, your next planned update, do you know what risks are being introduced and which ones you're trying to mitigate? Given that people don't think about these devices the same way they do for PCs, there are some unique challenges related to just getting them up to date. A lot of this is expected to be fully automated with zero user intervention. So it's on manufacturers to ensure that updates are properly signed and encrypted and authenticated, and that the devices don't just apply any update from the internet. There's a handshake mechanism ensuring that this update is coming from a trusted source. These devices can be turned off and powered down at any time. What would happen if the device is powered down while it's downloading an update? Even a more difficult question, what would happen if the device is powered down while applying an update? Can you safely recover? Again, given the criticality of the function that your device is performing, that could be a very important question. If you're working with life-sustaining or or medical technology, a crash from an update can be catastrophic. So those all need to factor into a strategy. And then there's the data side of things. Again, in our definition, we said not only are these things, everyday objects, but they're everyday objects that send and receive data. Data is obviously king. It is the most valuable asset in the IoT economy. However, and you're going to use data to make your devices smarter. You're going to build, models of machine learning potentially based on this data. You're going to consume the data yourself and let it influence your device roadmap. What new features need to be added? Well, let's look at how our users are using these devices. However, data is also a very valuable asset to malicious actors. And in addition to just unflattering headlines of the next data breach, regulatory agencies are cracking down on exactly how personal data is collected and stored. If you market your devices in Europe and you don't know the letters GDPR yet, you'll want to quickly come up to speed on how that new set of regulations is going to change the marketplace in Europe. And you can go ahead and assume that things like it or versions of it will eventually find their way into the US. So how much do you know personally about the data that your device collects and processes and stores? How much do you know about the practices of third parties? Are they caring for your data as they analyze it or retain it on your behalf? Are they taking as good care of that data as you do? How much is too much data? It's tempting to say, I want all the data. Anything my device is capable of collecting, I've got all these sensors, they're generating data, I just want it all. It is vital to resist that temptation. Not only is the regulatory environment going to make your life more complex the more data you collect, in many cases, the requirements exist or are coming to collect informed consent from your users. You've got to be able to tell them exactly what data you're collecting, how you're using that data, and give them the opportunity to let you know they'd like it to be removed from your systems. So aside from the desire to not be the next data breach headline, you just don't want to surprise your users. Having them read that your device was compromised in the newspaper is one thing, but then further down in that article, if they read about entire types of data that they had no idea you were collecting that are now part of this breach, that's absolutely the kind of surprise that will be catastrophic in the long run. So we've got a device idea. We've got we know what data we're going to collect. How do we run a process that ensures that we maintain security over the lifespan of this device? Richard Adler here, or Adler, sorry, is talking about how some of this is just going to be assumed, that we'll just become comfortable with a certain level of risk as consumers. Again, we'll have these devices. We will eventually become conscious that there is some level of risk with these devices, but we'll just begin to accept that as part of everyday life. Just like we accept that getting in a car and driving to work introduces risk to our life that doesn't exist if we just stay home. So there's different perspectives of risk across the industry even now. So the first organizational hurdle is simply accountability. Does your organization have a role that is specifically accountable for the security of your data? Security is not a job function, but it is beneficial, and sometimes it's required to carve out a role specifically accountable for this kind of security. In healthcare, we've had chief security officers and chief information security officers, or whatever the title is in your organization. We've had those around for a while, since HIPAA and the administrative portions of HIPAA came to be to carry that level of accountability. So who fills that role, and are they really empowered? If the individual you're holding accountable for security, told you that you should delay the next release of your product due to security concerns, what would happen? If the answer is, we're going to release anyway, then you likely have a meaningless title on your hands. When you work with third parties, do you know who fills that role within their organization? How frequently do the chief security officer of your team, how frequently do they communicate with the security accountable individuals at those partner organizations? Are those lines of communication open for questions and feedback? And as the security landscape changes, your device roadmap changes, those conversations should be ongoing. And then your process, right? So does your team know that they should be and that you are very security minded? Would a team working on your device and software say that it's a priority for your organization? If they wouldn't say it's a priority right now, could they at least point to documented standards that impact how they're supposed to do their daily job to improve security? How often do you audit compliance to the standards? Again, a standard without an audit is very much like a chief security officer without any power. It is very superficial and won't pass regulatory muster, certainly. Just having a documented standard is certainly something a regulator is going to look for, but they're also going to want to know what's your audit history against this standard. Do you know the risk profile of your backlog? We talked about every release having a unique risk profile. If there are high risk items at the top of your backlog, are you planning for that next big release already? And have you communicated with your team the need to, double down on security for those high risk items? As you decide how you're going to mitigate risk, are you documenting how and where you're applying those mitigations? If not, mitigation strategy is going to change over time. And next year, there may be a brand new, whiz-bang way to secure some aspect of your device. But if you don't know where you applied the old mitigation, then it's going to become a little bit more tedious to go back and figure out where to apply the new one. Just documenting that you've selected a strategy and applied it is also going to be something that a regulator looks for if you're in an environment where such regulations are part of your world. Communication is a two-way street. Personal communication and certainly security-related communication. There's outbound communication. So do you have a breach notification process and strategy? Does your team know how your organization would execute a breach notification exercise in the event that you became aware of a breach within your device itself or in your data storage? If a security researcher in the wild discovers a vulnerability, how would they reach you? It's becoming very commonplace to set up email addresses like alert@whatevermycompany.com or security@whatevermycompany.com to basically solicit that type of feedback. Also, if you do have those, put them on your website. Let people know that we are so serious about security that if you find something wrong, we appreciate even your letting us know via these email addresses. Some companies worry that soliciting this kind of feedback will, basically encourage people to start hacking on your devices. But to that, I would say that it's better to be informed by someone who's letting you know via an email address on your website than someone who is certainly out there who you might get an email that contains a ransomware solicitation. If I had to choose between those two, I would certainly take the person who's informing me via one of these other channels versus finding out after the data has been compromised. Finally, another type of outbound communication is your user documentation. Are you helping your users make good security decisions themselves with the IoT devices in their homes? A great example, and one that certainly comes blaring at us from that Target example, is letting users know that they should have a separate Wi-Fi network for their smart devices that is potentially disconnected from their regular PCs, such that if an attack happens on one side, you can hopefully prevent it from leaking over into the other and compromising, their PCs, where certainly, highly sensitive information is likely stored. So, it's not every user who's going to know how to act on that information, but some will. Wi-Fi router manufacturers are making it easier and easier to stand up multiple different networks. Some as easy as just tell us how many you want and point and click, and now you have 3. But unless the device manufacturers encourage that behavior as well, it may not be readily apparent to the users and customers when they should do that. So be part of that type of communication. Let them know, hey, we're very security minded. You're welcoming our device into your home. Here are some things you can do, not just with our device, but with all of your IoT devices, to ensure maximum security for your personal information. It would be easy to hear everything that was just said and become very discouraged or overwhelmed. Some things are true. Security is a never-ending job. Every time you've mitigated against the risk about, a new one comes along. It can be very overwhelming, but don't give up. Many people need the devices that you either have in the marketplace or that you're thinking about building to address their actual daily limitations. They're especially in the world of healthcare. If you're building a therapeutic device, people need you to do that. They're counting on you to do that in a secure manner, but please don't let that stand in the way of your next endeavor. You can and should build the next great IoT device successfully and securely. You will likely, again, as a consumer, have some of these devices in your own home. So every time you're feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of security, take that and insist that the device manufacturers that you're allowing into your own personal home, that they are taking it as seriously. You should demand that they treat your data with the same level of care that you treat your customer data. You should absolutely collect the data that supports your business cases. You should do it securely. Mitigations do exist for a lot of the known risks. You should use them and document them, but they're out there for a large portion of the work you need to do. In other words, there's very few cases where you'll be discovering a novel or new vulnerability. It's really about leveraging solutions that are out there already. Last but not least, work with technology partners that take security seriously. I work for PointClear Solutions. I would love to work with you at any stage of product development, whether it's an idea you have, to an implementation you're executing, to an iteration on something that's already in the marketplace. We work with clients in regulated spaces like healthcare every day. But whether you call us or not, absolutely get to know your technology partners, get to know them and their security practices, and let them know that you're serious about security and you expect that same standard of care from them. Do not worry about copying down what's on this slide. We will send a follow-up email to everybody who's registered for today's webinar, and you will get these links in your inbox. But I mentioned earlier some industry groups, and I did want to let you know about some that have really, really great resources available today to help organizations specifically in the IoT space going forward. One is the IoT Security Foundation. They've got great documentation. They've got an evolving set of standards that covers many of the areas that we talked about today. OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, has been helping companies secure web applications for a long time. And they now have a project dedicated to the unique challenges in the IoT space. The FDA itself hasn't been silent and has issued guidance for companies who are looking to introduce healthcare devices. They've issued guidance for pre-market, meaning companies who are at the idea or implementation stage, as well as post-market guidance, meaning your device is already out in the marketplace. That said, I would say right now that their guidance isn't necessarily as comprehensive as others. My read on that is that they're going to rely on these other industry organizations like the IoT Security Foundation to really work with industry participants to come up with really, really good standards and guidance they can offer. And then they'll adapt that to healthcare devices as needed. In addition, the FDA has been running a pilot program with a set of device manufacturers, no doubt with an eye toward how IoT and healthcare, that Venn diagram overlap, how those two come together, and how the future of healthcare devices is going to shape up. But certainly, wherever they land will be heavily influenced by the IoT community at large, including the two you see here. So again, don't worry about copying all these down. You'll get these in your inbox. I encourage you to definitely take a look, consume it. If you're in the healthcare space, definitely read the FDA guidance. Those documents are actually relatively short and easy to consume. So definitely do those. And with that, I definitely want to allow plenty of time for Q&A here. So Derek, I will turn it back to you to collect those questions.
Thank you, Michael. We do have several questions from the audience already, so we'll go ahead and dive right in. The first question, what would you recommend as first steps for an existing device manufacturer who believes they might need more focus on security?
Okay, that's a good question for sure. If you're already in the marketplace with an IoT device and you're unsure of, I think my audio may have just dropped, sorry. If you are already in the IoT marketplace and you're unsure if your security processes and practices are up to snuff, my first recommendation is to honestly assess and categorize your device. Go through one of those categorization examples from the IoT Security Foundation or some other organization, and be honest with yourself about the risk profile of the device you already have in the marketplace. Definitely conduct an audit. You will want a third party to come in, preferably one that has deep experience with security as it relates to IoT specifically. An auditor who is very familiar with the device architecture that you're using, with the data architecture that you're using, the potentially the cloud provider that you're using, and then take the findings from that audit and factor them back into your processes. Go ahead and establish that point of accountability we were talking about. Designate someone as your chief security officer, and then empower them. Give them the tools they need. And certainly, as you become aware of new risks, roll that into your process as a lesson learned, so that future iterations of your device benefit from what you're learning today. Most importantly, don't give up. It's never too late to take security seriously. And if you do find that there are via that audit that there are gaping holes, circle up with your technology partners. If you don't have one, find one and get those addressed. But the the temptation to ignore it or to minimize it should be avoided. It's if it comes up in an audit report and it fits your risk profile, you definitely want to take action very quickly.
Great, thank you. The second question, are there particular capabilities you look for when evaluating cloud services as part of your data strategy?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm moving away from the device then to where does the data go once it leaves the device? Ultimately, for many companies, that will be some kind of cloud provider, Amazon, Azure, Google, the big players. Right now, all of those cloud providers have guidance related to HIPAA compliance, PCI compliance, how to do things securely within their infrastructure. Even if you're not a healthcare covered entity that needs to worry about HIPAA, or you're not, doing credit card transactions and you're not part of the PCI compliance exercises, knowing how those two concerns impact your cloud usage by consuming those guidance documents will help you decide where along that spectrum you want to live. You will at very least become aware of what highly regulated organizations are required to do, and then you can determine which of those things you want to take on yourself, either as a requirement or as just a best practice statement of we care for our data in this way. So that would be my initial encouragement would be go locate those documents, read them, consume them, understand what companies who are more highly regulated than you might be are doing to secure data, and then take on the parts of those that make sense for you.
Great. This is our final question that we have. If security is a moving target, how do you recommend device makers stay up to date with the latest threats and mitigations?
Okay, it is absolutely a moving target. There is no question. That audit that I mentioned in the first answer there, that's a point in time. That's a snapshot. The day after the audit results are published, there may be brand new vulnerabilities that didn't exist and weren't part of that audit. So it's absolutely essential to stay up to date on the security landscape that impacts your devices and your data. One thing that I'm going to go back to is that organizational need for that accountable role, a chief security officer or whatever you call it in your organization, empowering that person to engage with partners in communication, join industry groups like the IoT Security Foundation or others, to both influence how those standards evolve over time, as well as be looped into the conversation and be on those mailing lists and staying up to date. Like I said, the last way you want to become informed of a security problem is by reading a newspaper and finding out that your device was impacted. So as that evolves, you're going to want to, again, incorporate that into your ongoing process, your product development lifecycle. You're going to want your software team to be aware of new and emerging threats as well. So that chief security officer, in addition to just consuming information about new threats, needs to also disseminate that and really rally the troops as new and significant vulnerabilities emerge. Hey guys, I found out about this new threat, this new attack happened last week. How are we going to either go back and mitigate against it or prevent it in our future roadmap activities?
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Those are all of our questions. So again, Michael, thank you for leading this topic, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. As a reminder, we'll be sharing a recording of today's webinar along with the additional resources Michael referenced via email within the next day or so. So please keep an eye out on your inboxes. And as always, if you would like to learn more about PointClear Solutions, you can find us online at pointclearsolutions.com. Thank you very much.